Hi there, in this video I'm going to show you how to do this bullet effect. Alright, let's get right into it. So first, let's design the mechanism by which we're going to spawn the bullets. So we're going to go to Project Settings. We're going to add a fire action. And we're going to go ahead and make this the mouse button, device 0 left button. Okay, so we're going to use the left mouse button to fire. Let's create a new scene in our scenes folder. And we're going to call this one, we'll just call it the spawner. This would be your gun scene or something similar, but we're just going to simply make this a node 2D. And we'll go ahead and call this spawner. All right, that's it for now. Let's create the bullet and then we'll come back to the spawner. So we're going to create our bullet scene and we're going to make this a kinematic body 2D. Now, there are a number of ways to do your bullet physics, so to speak. I'm using a kinematic body 2D for the fact that we're going to be able to very easily get collision information later. But you should know that there are other ways of doing it and that could be considered appropriate. So this is just the way I've chose to do it for this tutorial, but don't feel like you have to use a kinematic body 2D for your bullets. Feel free to use rigid bodies, plain old custom node 2Ds with raycasts, you know, things like that. So we need to add a collision shape 2D, and we also need to add a sprite. So what I've included in the repository is some assets for you to use for this tutorial. So I'm going to go ahead and drop my bullet texture into here, into our sprite, and it's pretty much good the way it is, so we're not going to worry about that too much anymore. We're going to go back to our collision shape 2D and add, you can add whatever shape you want. I'm going to use a rectangle shape because I think that's going to match sort of the best here. And I'm just going to make it maybe 6 in the X extent and 5 in the Y extent. Okay, so we have our collision shape in our kinematic body. So that's basically it for the bullet. So we're going to go back to our spawner. We're going to go ahead and add a script to it. So we're going to say, we're going to put this in the scripts folder, and it's going to be our spawner.gd. So I normally write in C#, so I'm going to write the script here so you don't have to watch me struggle, and then I'll go over what we're doing. Okay, so what we got here is a very simple script. Basically, it listens for the unhandled input event. If the event is that fire action that we defined in our project settings, then we are going to instance the bullet scene. So now I'm going to add the spawner to my main scene here, and we'll switch back to the 2D view. I'm going to put that in the middle just so we can see it. Now I got to put the bullet scene into here, otherwise I will get a crash. So I'm going to go back to scenes and just go ahead and drag and drop the bullet scene into that. So if we run this and I press the left click, we see that the bullet appears in the top left. That's because we're not doing any positioning. So let's go ahead and go back to our spawner script, and we'll just say bullet.global position is equal to, let me add node 2D here so I can get the IntelliSense. Global position is equal to self.global position. Okay, so now if I run the game, I'm going to see that the bullets get spawned in the middle. Now, they don't have any sort of velocity or anything, and that's what we're going to do in the bullet scene. So I'm going to go ahead and add a script to the bullet scene. So we're going to add this in our scripts directory, scripts bullet GD. And once again, I'll write this and come back and explain what I've done. All right, so here's our really simple bullet script to start. What I've done is I've defined a constant speed for 200 pixels per second. And I've defined a direction that we are going to use later. And then in my process, what I'm doing is I'm just moving the bullet to the right by our speed, and we'll see how we're going to change our direction in a little bit. But let's run this now. And we can see that our bullet is traveling way too fast, and that's because the move and collide does not multiply by delta for you. So we're just going to go ahead and pass that delta into this argument here, and we'll run it again. And so now we can see that we got some bullets that are moving. So that's a good step forward. All right, now let's get the direction to work the way that we want it to. So let's go back to the spawner here. And we are going to set the bullet.direction and we're going to make that equal to the get global mouse position minus our current global position, and we're going to want to normalize that whole thing, just so that way we're not getting any extra multiplicative effects in there. Okay, and then we'll pop back over to our bullet, and we are going to, instead of using vector2.right here, we're going to use our direction. So now our bullet should be traveling in the direction of our mouse. And there we go. So you'll also notice that the bullets are not angling themselves in that direction. So that will be as simple as in the spawner, we'll also do that. So we'll say bullet.rotation is equal to bullet.direction.angle. And so now we have properly rotated bullets. All right, so that's good. Let's go ahead and create a really quick tile map so that we can actually get collisions now. So we're gonna go ahead and create a tile map, and we're gonna change this cell to cell size to 16 by 16. And our resources, again, this is in the repository. So if you just wanna pull that up, drop in our tile set there. And so now we have our normal sort of background tiles here, which I'm going to fill. And let's see. We're going to fill this. And then for the wall tiles, I'm just going to surround the edge with walls, and maybe I'll paint a little something there and a little something there. So now we should see our bullets colliding with the terrain. So you notice they don't delete themselves, but they rather just stick there, and they actually slide a little bit. So this is the part where we're going to utilize the collision information from move and collide. So here I am back in the bullet script. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say var collision result is equal to move and collide, and then I'm going to say if collision result is not equal to null, then I'm just simply going to queue free the bullet. And there we go. The bullets now delete themselves when they collide. Let's up the speed a little bit. There we go. All right, now let's move into the fun stuff, which is the particles. So we're going to create a new scene. Let's go back to our scenes. And we are going to create a new scene. Let's call this one bullet smoke. And we're going to make this a particles 2D. Okay, so this part is a little bit tricky. So if you need to, feel free to pause or rewind the video. So we're going to go back to our assets. Remember, this is in the repository, so you can pull this down, or you can use your own assets. What I have here is I have a debris image that has 3 frames. So I'm going to go ahead and drop that onto my textures. And you'll notice that what I did is I basically just drew a bunch of amorphous blobs that all look different. And that just adds a little bit of variety to our particle effects. So for my process material, I'm going to add a new particles material. Okay, so we're going to leave that as is. We're going to go down to the canvas item material, and we're going to say new canvas item material here. Click into that, check particles animation, and we have 3 H frames. So now you see that this is only using one of those frames. Let's go back to our particles material, scroll all the way down to the animation section, change this offset to 1, and that's going to set us to the last frame of that debris particle. And if we set the offset random to 1, now we're going to be selecting any frame from the first frame to the third frame for an individual particle. So that you can already tell that's adding a little bit of variety. Okay, so the next thing we're going to want to do is this is our smoke particles. So we want to model this behavior after smoke. So we're going to keep the direction to the right, because what we're going to do is we're going to rotate it dynamically based on the normal of the bullet collision. So I'm going to turn the spread down to 25 or something like that. What I like to do is set a decently high initial velocity, but we're going to up the velocity random so you get some that don't go very far at all. We're going to turn the angular velocity up a little bit as well, just to add some rotation in there. Maybe we'll say 300 and give that a velocity random of 1 as well. Let's pop back up to our gravity, and we actually don't want much gravity at all. So let's just set that to 0 for now. Okay, and let's play with the scale too. So what I like to do is when I'm doing a scale curve, for something that's an explosion, I like to start at 0 and ramp up very quickly and then fade away over time. So you can see how that's giving us like a little bit of an explosion effect. It's not as impactful as it could be though. So here's what we're going to do about that. We are going to go to our lifetime and we're going to turn it down to something like 0.5. Then we're also going to turn the explosiveness up to something like 0.9. And so what this is going to do is this is going to group all of the particle animations together within a short period of time rather than being a constant stream when the explosiveness is set to 0. So 0.9 I found is a pretty good number. So that's what we got going on there. And I actually think that these particles are a little bit too long-lived, so I'm going to bump that down to 0.4 even instead. Okay, and of course the final thing is let's make it look like actual smoke. So what I'm going to do is I am essentially just going to turn down this alpha value, and I also might make it more gray instead of white. Okay, so that looks approximately good to me. So now we have some very light smoke effects. One other thing that I'm going to change is the initial starting angle. So you'll notice we set the angular velocity, but they're all starting at the same angle. So I'm just going to put in an angle of 180 and then set that to random as well. And that just adds a little bit of extra variability. Okay, and that looks pretty good as far as impact smoke goes. So what we're going to do is we're going to set one shot to on, and emitting is going to be false automatically, essentially. And I'm going to add an animation player, and I like to do animation player that autoplays. So we're going to call this a default animation. Let's turn on autoplay on load, so we don't have to use any code to control this. And let's go ahead and animate this emitting. So we're going to click on the keyframe here for the emitting on the particles, create that new track. We're going to set this to on. And we're going to play, and you're going to see that that plays. And so what we can do then is we can add a call method track on the bullet smoke, and we are going to call cue free at the end of that animation. So what's going to happen is as soon as we add this particle to the scene tree, it's going to play its animation once because it's set to one shot, and then it's going to delete itself. So that's a good no-code way of doing short-lived particle effects. Okay, so the next thing to do is to actually spawn that effect on bullet collision, right? So we're going to open up our bullet script. Let's do something very similar that we did with the spawner. And we're going to export a slot for that scene. All right, so there's our export. If we go back to the bullet, and I'm just going to rename this real quick. If we go back to our bullet, now we have our smoke scene. So let's go ahead and put that in there. Okay, so let's actually spawn that. So we have our collision result, right? If our collision result is not equal to null, we still want to queue free, but we also want to instance that smoke scene. So what we're going to do is we're going to say var smoke equals smoke scene dot instance as particles 2D. We're going to call get parent, add child, smoke, smoke.global position is equal to, now this is where we're going to utilize our collision result information. Collision result dot position. That's going to give us the exact position on the edge of the wall where the bullet collided. And then our smoke dot rotation is going to be rotated in accordance with the collision result dot normal dot angle. So that's going to set the position of the smoke against the very edge of the wall where it collided, and then also set the rotation based on the normal's angle. Now you can also just negate the direction and you can get a correct result, but if you're dealing with surfaces that are a little bit more complex, you'll probably get better results by using the normal. And you can see now that we have smoke effects. Now I think that's a little bit too dark. So I'm going to just pop on over to the bullet smoke, and I'm just going to edit this color and bring that back up a little bit, and we'll see how that looks. Yep, that looks much better to me. Okay, so it's not looking too great though. So that's just one layer of our impact effect. Let's do another layer. So once again, I'm going to create a new scene. This one's going to be called Bullet Impact. And we are going to make this one a sprite as the root node. Okay, and once again, we're going to take the assets. Again, I've provided this. Take collision.png and drop it in. So you can see that this has 4 frames that we're going to play for our bullet collision. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add an animation player. Okay, and before we use the animation player, we want to set up the animations on the sprite. So we're going to go to the animation section and we're going to say we have 4 H-frames. And so now we'll be able to animate the frames from 0 to 1 to 2 to 3. And we're also going to want to not center this. And we're just going to do the offset -8 in the Y. Okay, so now we have a collision effect that's facing to the right, whose origin is on the very edge, right? So that's going to make positioning a whole lot easier. All right, so for the animation player, we're simply just going to create, same deal, create a default animation, set it to autoplay on load. Let's just give us some ample time, 2 seconds for the animation, and let's start animating the frame. So we're going to add the frame here, and we'll just use the default. Actually, let's make the step 0.05 seconds, and we're going to zoom in on the timeline a little bit. Okay, so we're just going to edit the frame, type in 1 and click the keyframe, and then 2, and then 3. Okay, so that's automatically playing. So that's kind of what we're going to get there. And once again, we are going to add our call method track, and we are going to call queueFree after 0.05 seconds after the last frame. Let's call this Bullet Impact. All right, and we're going to go back to our bullet, and we're going to do the same exact strategy that we did with the smoke scene. Okay, so I've exported a bullet impact packed scene, and I'm spawning it in basically the same exact way as the smoke is spawned here. So let's go ahead and add that to our bullet scene. So I'm going to go back to the inspector here, and we have our bullet impact export slot. So I'm just going to go ahead and put that in there. So now let's take a look at what that looks like. And I have an error because I accidentally named these things the same thing. So I'm just going to rename this to impact. And I will change all of the occurrences. Okay, so we got that renamed. Let's play it again. Okay, and I don't know how well you can see that, but you can see now we have a little bit of a collision happening there with the smoke happening behind it. One thing that you can do to make that collision a little bit more visible is you can just increase the scale. I like to increase the scale of it dynamically, basically assign it a random scale within a range. But to save on time for this tutorial, I'm just going to bump up the scale myself by 2, and we're just going to make it really big. Okay. I'm actually going to bump that down to 1.5 so it's not so overpowering in comparison with the smoke. Okay, so that looks really nice. So we have basic impacts here. If you wanted to, you could also use a lot of these strategies to just send chunks of stone, for example, flying off as well. You can essentially just layer particles and animations on top of each other to get a really nice effect. But to really sell the bullet effect, we are going to add some lighting now. So on the bullet itself, go ahead and add a light 2D. And what you can do is you can simply add a texture for the light 2D. We're going to go back to our assets here. And just go ahead and grab one of these light files. I think lights 1 probably makes sense here. So let's go ahead and drag the texture in there, and you can see how it's sort of lighting it up already. This texture is sort of oblong. You might want to use a texture that more matches the shape of your bullet, but this is going to work just fine. I'm going to change the texture scale to 2 though, and I'm going to turn the energy down to a more reasonable level to where these colors are almost washed out. All right, and if I run the game now, Now you'll see that the bullets have a very distinct glow about them, and we can actually probably go ahead and bump up this texture scale even more if we wanted to. Yeah, so now we have a glow around our bullets, and you can see that that itself has already made a big difference in what's going on here. And the final thing we can do to really bring home the effect is we can add lighting changes to the bullet impact. So let's go ahead and add another light 2D to our bullet impact. And we're just going to set an initial texture. Maybe we can probably use these. Yeah, this is probably going to be okay. Now, we probably also don't want to center this. You know what? Let's just move the light over more like this. That's going to work just fine. Okay, so we're going to keyframe our initial texture there. And it's going to be the same deal. As we step, we're actually going to change the texture every step. Oh, I did not keyframe that. My bad. So make sure after you add the texture, you keyframe it. And so we're just going to keep dragging over each incremental one until we have something that looks good. Okay, so now here's the tricky part. We have one more light that we want to add, but the problem is that we're cue freeing this, right? So let's go ahead and just move that cue free out of the way. We are going to have to change the visibility of the bullet impact so that way we don't get stuck on the last frame, right? So what we're going to do to avoid the issue of getting stuck on the last frame is we are going to keyframe our texture to start. Now, typically I use a root node that's different than a sprite node so I can toggle the visibility, but this should be fine for this example. So we're going to keyframe the texture just to get around this issue. And we're going to clear it and keyframe it there. Okay, so we still have our animation. We're in good standing here. We lose the helpful little images when we go to null texture, but that is okay. And then we'll put the cue free somewhere after that. So we're going to add in our last light here. We're going to step one more and make this lights 5. Sorry, let's insert a key there. We're going to make this lights 5. Okay. So now we have several lights going on, and I'm just going to change this down to 0.5 energy as well. Okay, so we have an animated light source along with the animated sprite, and then one step after that last animation, let's cue free it. So our final length is 0.25, so I'm just going to turn this down to 0.25, and there we go. So let's see how this looks. And there you go. What you can also do is you can animate the intensity of the light that is corresponding to the bullet impact. So you can actually just go ahead and change this energy here, and you can make it rise in brightness and then fall in brightness. I'm not going to go through that for the sake of time, but that is something you can do. What I do want to try is to up the texture scale of this light just to see what that looks like. Yeah, so I like that better. So now we have something that looks pretty nice, actually. So that's not a complete tutorial, and I'm not the best artist, but that just sort of gives you an idea of how you can model your bullets. Use a kinematic body 2D for move and collide, and the reason that we're using move and collide is to get that position and normal so that we can spawn the effects in an accurate spot, right? And then when you're actually spawning the effects, you want to layer a couple of things. First thing you want to do is have some kind of debris and or smoke, right? So that's going to be like your basis. And then what you want to do is overlay an impact sprite on top of the smoke. So that is the animated bullet impact that I was showing you here. So you want to layer this sort of visual animation on top of that. And then you want to add lights, which are going to make your bullets really pop. And that's basically it. Here's another thing you can do if you want the impacts to feel really chunky, is you can actually go to your bullet smoke and you can limit the FPS. So you can change this fixed FPS to be 20, for instance, and that's actually going to make it look chunkier. You see that? So that looks more like it's hand animated. And actually what I might do is, just to show you one more thing you can do, is you can also play with the scale here. So I might just turn the scale up to 1.5 and really lean into that effect. And there we go. So now we got something that feels very, very chunky. You see what I mean? So you can just tweak these parameters. As long as you have a solid foundation there, you can play with the intensity of the lights, you can play with the frame rates of the particles, the scale of the particles, all of that good stuff. So that's a basic rundown of how you can achieve decent looking bullet effects in Godot, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, be sure to like and subscribe. You can also follow me on Twitter @Firebelly. Wishlist my game Swordslinger on Steam. A link to that is in the description.